Hi, I'm delighted to be here and to be able to speak to you, even though I'm quite far away. And I want to talk about why stories are so important. Why isn't good data enough to change minds and attitudes in policymakers and in the rest of us? What is it about stories that's so human and critical? And I'm not there with you to ask you to answer, but think about some of the answers as I come up with them. Stories are emotionally compelling. Somehow they make us feel, they touch us in our heart. They're memorable, they stay with us. They can inspire us in new ways to think differently and do different things. And they often give us new ideas about something that we hadn't thought about that way before. Basically, we humans like stories, and they're a tremendously important way for us to communicate. But in the last 20 or 30 years, we've had neuroscience to back up our understanding of stories with excellent data about different parts of how the brain lights up when we hear and see stories that help us improve our comprehension of situations. Neuroscience has really given us a much more scientific argument that when material is in a story, it stays with us in a very different way. But nevertheless, we somehow assume that some audiences, especially very smart, highly educated people, don't trust stories. They're too sort of soft and gushy. And that we really need hard data to be persuaded. That policymakers are very rational people and we should just give them the facts and assume that they will know what to do with that. Well, for anyone who was shaking their head while I said that, I have news. Almost all of us are more persuaded by powerful stories, which may have some data in them, but they're narrative based. They can have a little data in them, but if the material is loaded with data, it's very hard for us to remember it. It doesn't stick with us. The stories are more meaningful, and there's lots of tests on this now. They make sense of life for us. They're stickier. I like sticky, that idea of it. They stick with you throughout your life. So what is a story? Well, there are many different ways and definitions to consider when we think about story. But for the purpose of simplicity, let me give you a definition that I think works pretty well. Again, I'm not arguing this is the only definition, but I think this will help us in thinking about this in the context of this presentation. So my definition is somebody wants something very much and they have trouble getting it. They have lots of trouble getting it. They have obstacles. They have issues. There are external reasons that there are problems. There are internal reasons why there are problems. So you really do have to think about how to develop stories that use that component of wanting something and having difficulty getting it as a way to think of stories that cause an audience to lean in, as we say, to get really interested. Many organizations think they use stories pretty well, and they're often just trying to disguise their data with some storytelling elements, and that doesn't work particularly well. Organizations may need to spend more time on their characters' problems, their obstacles, their troubles, and less time on the success of their programs. So a common website story in many organizations often looks like this. Number one, people were in pain. Number two, we have developed a very excellent program to solve the problem. Number three, give us money. That's not a story. We like to think that everything's a story, but everything isn't a story. That's not a story. That's sort of a mixed statement of a situation and why we, the organization, are terrific, but it's not a great example of powerful storytelling that will really get people to think differently or feel differently or be part of a situation that feels more meaningful to them. So let me give you a good example, or one that I think is good, from the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, Tuberculosis, and Malaria, which began in 2002, and which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. The Global Fund was funded by many different donor countries who supported its ideas, and it started with substantial funds, and it did very, very well in its work. But by 2008, the Global Fund had a problem. Several donor countries had cut their pledges, and some were just not paying up. Donor fatigue seemed to have set in, and policymakers felt that the fund was just a bottomless pit of needs that would never be met. Up until then, the messages from the fund to the donors and the policymakers were primarily framed, as I was mentioning earlier, in data. And the organization had excellent numbers in terms of what they were doing that they could use. But since that didn't seem to be working, the fund communicators decided to try a new approach. And they developed a campaign called Here I Am, which you can find on your internet access as well, which provides video portraits of real people talking about very specific problems and health issues and how the Global Fund has helped them personally. Characters from all over the world talked about how the fund had made them access testing around HIV/AIDS and gave them specific support for their very serious health problems. So there are very personal stories based in the idea of people who wanted to get healthy again and couldn't do it without the support of this very important program. The Here I Am program was shown online. It was shown at many meetings and discussions, and it was shown to the board of directors of the fund. And it was extremely successful. That year, the replenishment fund request had a 30% increase in funds, and countries pledged $12 billion to deal with the work of the fund. That's a pretty good success rate, 30% increase in 1 year to the funds that were being used. Why? Why do stories work? Why did this story work? Well, there are many reasons, I'm sure. It's always hard to tease out the results when situations are complex and hard to read. But certainly the more powerful that storytelling was, the more useful it was in the context of this. It was an important piece of the puzzle, and one that got significant credit for the increased donation by policymakers, which is, of course, what we're all looking for when we're trying to get more effective results for our efforts. In your next breakout session, you're going to be asked to take on these ideas of effective storytelling for change. I'm so sorry I can't be with you to hear what you come up with. Let me leave you with a helpful thought for your work. It's a little catchy phrase that I think you might consider useful. Numbers numb, stories store. Again, numbers numb, stories store. Remember that and keep up with the exciting, important work that you're doing, and good luck. Thank you.